Tell you a quick story about what type of person we have here in Mr. Vernon Burton. 5 years ago, I participated in the Harvey Gantt commemoration here at Clemson, and I needed to leave here and go to New York. And Vernon Burton, 10, 11 o'clock at night, took me to the train station 5 years ago, so that was unforgettable, and I thank you very much. And I stand here today on the shoulders of so many people. I see so many familiar faces in the audience, and all during the years, I'm very appreciative to many people like you for really the support they have given me. So today, I'd like to give you you might say, a personal account of history. This is going to differ from maybe the history of books, because again, like history, this his story, this is my story. And in my books, I don't have any bibliography because I am the source of the information in my books. And of course, it's personal, but I am an eyewitness to history. But I'm also an activist, so I marched. I went to jail twice, bailed out in a few minutes by the NAACP, and I continued on taking pictures. But it was 55 years ago that I was here on Clemson University campus, photographing Harvey Gantt. And it was an interesting day because, again, I was told there were 4 African Americans on the campus that day. SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement, thought that perhaps because things in Mississippi had gone astray, that there might be violence relative to Harvey Gantt. How it was a very peaceful day, and they termed it very right here at Clemson when they said integration with dignity, because nothing happened. But being one of the 4 African Americans, and by the way, they even told the maintenance crew and the people working in the dining hall not to really be present that day. They really were trying to avoid any type of situation here at Clemson. And of course, it was a very peaceful integration, but it was my great experience to be a part of that, to see this part of history. And I followed Harvey Gantt further back than the major press really covered him. I started with Harvey Gantt before he went to Iowa State, not able to enter Clemson, and even when he built his model that was a part of the application to Clemson, that was a requirement for him entering Clemson. I have pictures of that in my books as well. So it's been quite a journey, and please bear with me a few minutes, and I'd like to share some of those moments with you. This is what I call Harvey Gantt and the Sea of Reporters. Again, this is kind of give you an idea of the time. This is before, you might say, video, and portable capabilities of really, video an event, because they use motion picture film. And here you see NBC, you see CBS, no CNN. CNN was a long time coming from this moment in history. Yes. Life under segregation. I want to give you kind of a glimpse of some of the things I photographed, and then I'm going to revert back to my start in photography. But again, how things were. There were no African Americans in the political things going on in South Carolina at the time. I was run out of the Orangeburg County Courthouse for taking that picture where the young man was looking at the colored-only water fountain, restroom. These are some pictures that are kind of giving you an idea, a glimpse back during the time where, of course, all of the school systems are segregated. This is a picture I took at my mother's school in Calhoun County, next door to Orangeburg County, and then you have Clarendon County. But this is when the students receive what is called a separate but equal school bus. When South Carolina, as Dr. Hine was mentioning yesterday, passed the 3% sales tax, this is one of the separate but equal school buses, and they're taking an outing on this particular day, again, at my mother's school in Calhoun County. Racial change, the beginning of the civil rights movement, and transformations from segregation, all attributed to Dr. Martin Luther King. I give Dr. Martin Luther King great credit for the great orator that he was, the fact that he was the symbol of this change in America. But actually, ladies and gentlemen, from my perspective, he was a latecomer. At the time that I placed the real beginning of the American civil rights movement, Martin Luther King had not married Coretta Scott King. He was still in school at Boston. And so many things were happening. The problem with my making that statement is that the people who really, in my opinion, if you could draw a straight chronological line from one place to another to see that change that took place, in my opinion, there were about four waves of change that brought upon the American civil rights movement. And the Montgomery bus boycott was just one of them. Of course, I photographed King when he came to Claflin University. This is President Manning at Claflin. But I'm now going to revert back to how I became a photographer, growing up photographer. And I started with a Kodak Baby Brownie camera, says robot, $2.50. It took one picture at a time, one button, no flash, drugstore process, and it was a hand-me-down from my brother. This is another camera I got, and this is like a self-portrait in front of the mirror. In 1949, at 12 years old, I attribute so much of my beginning to three photographers. One was E.C. Jones of Sumter, South Carolina. Another was John W. Goodwin of Columbia, South Carolina. But it was E.C. Jones, who, as I'm going to show you in a minute, that really brought me into the events happening in Clarendon County, which is only like 32 miles from where I live, in Orangeburg. But these were life-changing events happening in Clarendon County, because there, the brave people, just ordinary people, farmers, people from ordinary walks of life, signed a petition. First, I'm not going into, of course, all the details, the chronological details of how that happened, but anyway, they loaned their names to the Briggs petition. In my opinion, that petition being the template of what becomes Brown versus Board of Education case, chronologically kind of puts a question mark as to the beginning of the American Civil Rights Movement, because if, as most history books will agree, that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks were reacting to the, and they were inspired by the Brown versus Board of Education case, giving them some hope that, hey, what we do here will bring about some monumental change. Then you might have to ask, well, if they were reacting to that in 1955, December 1st, when Rosa Parks sat down and Martin Luther King becomes involved, then where did Brown come from? And Brown comes from years earlier, Briggs versus Elliott being the template case. And Dr. Kennedy and I were talking earlier, and there are many reasons why that it was not named Briggs versus Board of Education, but you probably have your own reasoning about that. But anyway, but it was E.C. Jones. Actually, all the pictures that you will find, as far as my inquiry has produced, were taken really by three photographers: Alex Rivera, E.C. Jones of Sumter, South Carolina, who was pulled in by the NAACP, and Reverend J.A. Delane, and myself. Of course, I was assisting E.C. Jones. By the way, some of the pictures we took during those days, we never got paid for. But still yet, we felt that what the people there were doing was very important as we began taking these pictures. Unfortunately, a lot of times when photographers take pictures and they sell them to maybe a family member or something, and that family member then donates them to a museum, then they've lost the photographer's name. And then it might appear that this family is really the creator of these pictures, whereas they have forgotten about the photographer's credit. And so in my books, I kind of bring out and tell you the stories about other photographers beside myself. It was my job, by the way, to carry this case. Majestic Studio, because that Majestic Studio was the name of E.C. Jones's studio in Sumter, South Carolina. And that case and the memories from this really are forever in my memory, because it was only after I became older that I realized the importance of what I was being involved at. There was another kind of event that E.C. Jones pulled me into and didn't pay me any money for it, but instead paid me with photographic paper and film from Shore Air Force Base that came out of their refrigerators, which were not used in the reconnaissance missions that their Shore Air Force Base used at the time. But years later, I began to realize how important those events were. Many times these pictures were taken like on a Sunday or a commemorative time because most of these people we're looking at were run out of Clarendon County, unable to tell their story, unable to contribute to history. Reverend Delane's house burned to the ground. This is an interesting picture for me and one I reflect back on often. All I was told and could, in the mind of a young person at the time, could fathom was that this big lawyer from New York was coming to Charleston, and I was driven down there by the president of the NAACP in Orangeburg. Turned out this big lawyer was Thurgood Marshall getting off the train at the Silver Media. By the way, when they did a film on this, and I was one of the consultants, they had the hardest time trying to find that Samsonite suitcase in the bottom of the picture. But anyway, again, after Thurgood Marshall achieves the victory of Brown versus Board of Education, then he begins to travel throughout the United States. It's interesting that he did not go back to Topeka, Kansas. You know where he went to? Thurgood Marshall came back to South Carolina and Clarendon County, Columbia, South Carolina, and Orangeburg. And the next picture I'm going to show you again is him speaking in Claflin University in Orangeburg. Another interesting thing about this picture is that the times I'm talking about here, keep in mind, up until this time, and in my books, I have like 300 pictures that appear even before 1955 when the Reverend Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks become engaged in the so-called beginning of the American Civil Rights Movement. So this is a picture of James Sultan in Orangeburg, one of the persons who represented the leadership. So the next strangest thing I'm going to mention to you is that the second wave in history, in my opinion, that the Civil Rights Movement began from, again, it was not yet the Montgomery bus boycott, but again, I'm going to throw another town at you, my hometown, Orangeburg. Again, when the people of Clarendon County were run out of Clarendon County, the movement spread to Orangeburg, and we engaged in demonstrations against Coca-Cola, Sunbeam bread, because after Thurgood Marshall made that speech in Orangeburg, local parents then tried to test the Supreme Court's ruling and send their children to school, and the same thing happened to them that happened in Clarendon County. They were fired from jobs, evicted from their homes, sharecroppers lost their way of earning a living, and people like Reverend J. Delane, Harry Briggs, Nathaniel Briggs, and others, again, run out of town having no ways of income. But again, to prove the point that this was before Martin Luther King, and one of the things I think that he should be really remembered for is nonviolence. But James Sultan in 1950, 52, 53, and 54 he had gone to in the army and fought for this country and come back and find that he was unable to send his children to school. And he wanted to literally go, he was ready and armed, so to speak, to fight against anything that prevented him from having freedom, justice, and equality at the time. It's interesting that gas at this time is 33 cents a gallon. Members of this group, right, from Trinity, by the way, if you want to know where Montgomery, Alabama gets the idea for the Montgomery bus boycott and to really attempt to make change happen, they got it from 4 individuals who were invited down after Rosa Parks sits down on December 1st, and they stayed at Reverend Abernathy's home, and they participated in the talks the next day, even before Reverend Martin Luther King is even elected to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. And so the people in Orangeburg, and the reason they are part of the, I would call a second wave of change, is because they really, you might say, contributed the idea of disobedience and boycotting of nationally known products. They gave that idea concept to the people in Montgomery, Alabama. Again, a historical note that is often omitted or really not, people are not aware of it. So Orangeburg plays a very important part. Here are student demonstrators in Trinity Church in Orangeburg. Again, Fred Moore, who I'm not sure whether Dr. Hines mentioned him yesterday, but this is civil disobedience. This is before, again, the Montgomery bus boycott. Marching in Orangeburg, marching. In 1953, when Jet Magazine is attracted to what's happening in Orangeburg, again, before the Montgomery bus boycott, they come to Orangeburg, and the events are so prolonged. Before they leave, they request me to become a part of Jet Magazine. And so I became a Jet Magazine correspondent for them at that particular time. Of course, the unique thing about it is you can understand the plight of a person at my age was, here I'm getting ready to go out on assignment, and I say, Dad, can I borrow the car? It's kind of difficult to be a correspondent at that time, to go anywhere and really cover events. But a little later on, of course, I admitted the year there, but a little later on, of course, I was able to get my first car, which my mother detested the fact that she thought it was very dangerous to have press on the car at that time. The license plate, by the way, reads 1956. And students locked up in the Pink Palace in Orangeburg, students getting out of jail in Orangeburg, getting out of jail. This is where I went to jail, right here. I went to the city jail. Most students who were arrested in Orangeburg, as Dr. Hines brought out yesterday, in the demonstration that were nearly 368, I think, were arrested. They went to the Pink Palace in Orangeburg, which was a very dirty, very nasty type of jail. Matthew Perry and Earl Copeland. It was Earl Copeland who bailed me out of jail. Harvey Gantt being escorted off the campus of Sultan State College for leading, he was the SGA president, and he led the students into supporting people in Orangeburg who engaged in the boycott. Marching in downtown Orangeburg, marching past my photography studio, ministers marching in Orangeburg. The other thing I try to bring to my photography is some creativeness and dignity in the photographs rather than just a photograph of what's going on. I tried to add, again, some quality to the photographic way that I was doing this, like this with a wide angle lens and so forth. Marching, demonstrating. This is the what is known, I think perhaps Dr. Donaldson may mention this, I think in his presentation. This is what's called the Edwards case in Columbia, South Carolina, 1963. Again, the Confederate flag flying across the state capitol. This is an interesting picture. I could never figure out, and this is before Photoshop. I was wondering how could the birds be kind of flying, you might say, against the way the wind was blowing the flags. Never figured it out, but anyway, this is not a doctored up photograph. Again, this picture is important to me because it was my first picture in Jet which occupied an entire page. So I was very happy to contribute that to a national publication. Roy Wilkins and a local minister in Orangeburg, Roy Wilkins from the NAACP came down to speak to them. The Orangeburg incidents, if you go back in the Life magazine this time, are often omitted by history books because they haven't quite linked everything together. This is Kenneth Kaunda of Uganda coming to speak with the leadership in Orangeburg about how he can follow what's going on in Orangeburg, dealing with his own country and Great Britain and seeking freedom. And by the way, and after this, 10 African nations did achieve freedom during this particular time. And I think Clarendon County and Orangeburg might have influenced what they did. One of the largest pictures ever printed in Jet was when I took this picture of the Ellery school teachers. After the Supreme Court ruling, South Carolina officials and legislators go crazy. They go into overnight session to pass legislation to attack the NAACP because they think of it as being the organization that brought about some of the Supreme Court's ruling. And so they put a stipulation in the contract for teachers: if you are now or if you have ever been a member of the NAACP, you might not be reemployed. So these teachers resigned. And of course, there's my picture across 2 pages. This at that time was the largest picture ever published in Jet magazine at the time, across the 2 pages of Jet magazine. Again, marching and demonstrating. Students locked up in the Pink Palace. Another one of my most requested pictures of freedom marches in downtown Orangeburg, downtown Orangeburg, downtown Orangeburg. Along the way of doing my photographs, I had the very fortunate experience of really becoming a friend with, at that time, Senator John F. Kennedy. And in a press conference in New York, He befriended me, kept me from being thrown out of a press conference. And at that time, I became one of the few correspondents could actually go on his airplane, which was named after his daughter, the Caroline. So those are some of the great experiences I feel that, I cherish today looking. However, it was not me that ever got to know, you might say, President John F. Kennedy. I knew him as Senator John F. Kennedy because at the time I first met him in New York, he was just announcing that he was going to be a candidate. Henri Monteith, again, this was an assignment for Jet Magazine outside of her home in Columbia, South Carolina, where she received a letter saying that she would be admitted to the University of South Carolina. By the way, we made a lot of money back during those days as correspondents for Jet Magazine. $35, there's my check stub. Again, this was my beat, so to speak. After a while, Jet, by the way, wanted you to send pictures to them exclusively. I got you might say, a kind of stern letter from them saying, do not share your pictures with other publications if we are paying you and you're on our payroll. But I got to kind of bypass that by taking 2 or 3 cameras around my neck, such as I did at Clemson University. And I was able to, because again, this was my way of making a living. This is a young person's way of, you might say, making money, and this is my hustle, so to speak. The Orangeburg massacre in Orangeburg really, in 1968, after the passage of the Civil Rights Acts of the mid-60s, still allows a segregated restaurant and bowling alley to exist in Orangeburg, which led to the death of 3 students and injuring of 27 at the time. This is Dr. Oscar Butler at the bowling alley trying to quell the students. Killed in that were the 3 students of South Carolina State University. Some people refer to the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement and the first wave of change in that transition as really with Briggs being perhaps the first wave. They also sometimes refer to the last wave or the last big civil rights demonstration is occurring in Charleston, South Carolina. At the time, white and black workers working side by side doing the same job. The African-American workers were only paid half as much. And so that picture is of Andrew Young we're talking with Ralph David Abernathy, again marching in downtown Charleston, And for the first time in the 10-year relationship I had with Jet Magazine, I make the front cover and got a big check, $100 at the time. My friendship with John Johnson, who is the late John Johnson, and my friend Andre Rice. This is a picture of us at that time. I'm going to give you a quick view of what, again, after this period of time, we're now going through a period of, say, like for the mid-50s through the 70s of photographs. And I began taking, you might say, the culture, the heritage of pictures that reflect my experiences in South Carolina. Again, I'm just going to do a fast children at play, looking at a burned down school, children at playground, a band. This is just ordinary citizens' village, just ordinary lives, campus fraternities. No, I'm sorry, that was again the Charleston Hospital Workers Strike, because there's Andrew Young. Again, an inventor who invented something, a business group during the time. This is Benjamin Mays, by the way. And by the way, he dressed like that every day, because I'll kind of give you an idea of Andrew Young, a young Jim Clyburn with hair, and Maceo Nance, President State College, marching downtown Orangeburg, LBJ, Landside, a home that, a forerunner to the homes that helped sick and elderly people. Skip Pearson, a Columbia, South Carolina musical legend, a sorority. Another shot of that marching. I'm just going through this very quickly. Pictures on State College campus. So some of these are a repeat of what we've seen earlier. One of the things about being a photographer, you might say in the civil rights movement, as opposed to maybe other photographers, is I had the inside track. Many photographers were only able to take photographs of maybe the signs when the marchers were doing a demonstration. I was able to go behind the scenes, you might say, and get them making the signs before they went out. So having an inside access like that really is a great advantage to being a photographer. Or sometimes you can get that advantage. So here, that gentleman was making that. Just a picture in my studio. Again, a car sales going on by Paul Webber of Orangeburg, the World's Fair, voting at Allen University. Again, another color shot of voting. This is doing about 63 voting rights. This is I.D. Quincy Newman. I.D. Quincy Newman, I can't understand it. He was very important to the civil rights movement. Helped to keep a lot of things peaceful, but there's not very much information about him. Very few books, very few publications, but again, a very important player. Again, that shot of thanks God. Again, here's what I'm doing today. I find a lot of times young people can't relate to what went on in the civil rights movement. And so a few years back, I put together, with the aid of now Photoshop, images that kind of in one picture kind of tell the story. And this is my attempt to do this. Here is, say, the original of this is Septima Clark of Charleston, South Carolina. And by the way, gentlemen, I changed history a little bit in this, but it was elective and it was in an honest way. As photographers, we're not supposed to really, now with Photoshop, change things on you might say, a news or historical picture. But at this time, Septima Clark was blind in one eye. And so I didn't want her to be remembered like that. So I changed the eye, one of her eyes. And of course, I made a painting which hangs in my own personal gallery in Orangeburg out of the photograph. And again, taking a collage of the Orangeburg massacre here. Again, the Orangeburg massacre. The teardrop on the young lady's face I made with Vaseline, by the way. Orangeburg massacre. When Senator Strom Thurmond died, I used the same technique. Even though he largely opposed everything that I really wanted in living in South Carolina, voted against the civil rights passage, all other kind of things. Nevertheless, he did do a lot of good as well. And I pay tribute to him by making this collage. Actually, it looks like it's a car, but it looks like a very old car, but actually he's in a parade in Springfield, South Carolina, and I put him against the American flag. Again, this was reproduced in about 7 newspapers right after his death in 2003. Again, with my picture of Thurgood Marshall, I placed him for the cover of my book. Film to digital. Now, today, we're all photographers. The photographers who took our picture a few minutes ago, up until now, we use digital. But see, I have this large collection of film. And what am I to do with that film? It's fading away. It's cracking up. I'm losing them. And so as I go from, here's what some of my film look like, for example. The reason she is important, it may not look important to just an ordinary portrait, but she's one of the freedom riders, Glenda Gaither, graduate of Claflin University here, and that's what's happening. The emulsion is peeling off of the negative. So what I did, after a few years, I designed what I call a film toaster. And I first built one out of balsa. And then, of course, that's the real thing there. It enables me to go from like a flatbed scanner, which most photographers use, that takes a minute or 2 minutes to digitize a film negative. Here I can do it in like a 50th of a second. So I think God is looking over my shoulder because today I'm selling these all over the world. It's called the film toaster. The Senator Barry Goldwater collection has just been completed using my film toaster. Senator Barry Goldwater, many of you may not know, he was an avid photographer and photographed the great Southwest. And his collection is being done this month, December. If you get Arizona Highways magazine, you will see a complete spread in the magazine about Senator Barry Goldwater's film that he has digitized. Otherwise, after a while, no matter what you do, trying archivally, eventually the film will be affected. Color slide film grows an algae on it, but other emulsions have their own set of problems. Kind of give you an example. We, of course, when we take a roll of film, it becomes a negative. And then, of course, we convert it and becomes a photograph, and that's the process behind it. John F. Kennedy in a wave, and again, John F. Kennedy in the normal photograph. So again, from these personal accounts, and standing on the shoulders of many of you in this room, and the great historians, and my experiences with you and learning from you and reading your books and attending conferences like this, I feel that I have grown to really understand a great deal about South Carolina's history, an important role, and it's been due to people like you in this room, and I am so happy that I was able to participate in this conference and that Dr. Burton invited me. Out of those photographic experiences that I participated in, I have produced 4 books. My first book, Mercer University, was done. It was called Freedom and Justice. My second book is called Out of the Box in Dixie. All of these books, by the way, are available on Amazon, eBay, whatever. And then I did one on the Orangeburg massacre. All of these are large-scale photographs, by the way, books, photographic books, coffee table books, because I wanted to add the dignity to this, to the civil rights movement, and the people that really, in some cases, risked their life. I didn't want to put out a book, publish a book that would say have a picture of somebody in it who might have sacrificed his land or his home, and he's in a book and his picture is only the size of a stamp. So the large formats books allow me to do that. My present and final book that is going to be premiered on December 11th at the Richland County Public Library is called Unforgettable. And you see the picture of the little boy, and I'd like to conclude my presentation with this, but it's a great memory on my part to remember the time that I took that photograph. It was in Columbia, South Carolina in about 1962 or 63. And the people there with the Confederate flag flying atop the Capitol dome were singing, "We Shall Overcome." And I looked over to my left or right, and I saw this little boy, and he was holding his mother's hand. And just at the minute that I made the exposure, a sliver of light just came down through the crowd and lit this little boy. And I later colorized it, and here it is on the front cover here of my publication. And the subtitle is Life, Hope, and Bravery. And I got away without using any punctuation in there. I argued with many people as they were assisting me with this. And they said, well, it's supposed to be this way. I said, well, I want it this way. I just want life, I want hope and bravery, just as it is, even though if it violates some kind of grammatical or whatever. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for this wonderful experience and for your listening to me today. Thank you.